To be a successful entrepreneur, you should have good ideas, but the definition of a good idea varies depending on whom you ask. A great idea should have several features. Firstly, the great idea should be various and novel. Secondly, the great idea should be unique, which means no one has thought about it. Thirdly, it is essential for great ideas to be transformative and productive. All ideas are essentially a combination of other smaller ideas, but this doesn't mean they can't be unique. Merely copying doesn't make anything idiosyncratic, it's the individuality that one puts in which makes a concept stand out. Constant innovation leaves no room for stagnation and thus, adds on to the basic idea, effectively making it unique. Unique ideas are inspired by basic things, they are simply extensions of pre-existing notions. And, an idea or a concept is unique only when it transcends its predecessor and serves its purpose in a better and more precise way.
A leader can define or clarify goals by issuing a memo or an executive order, an edict or a fatwa or a tweet, by passing a law, barking a command, or presenting an interesting idea in a meeting of colleagues. Leaders can mobilize people's energies in ways that range from subtle, quite persuasive, to the coercive threat or the use of deadly force. Sometimes a characteristic leader, such as Martin Luther King Jr., can define goals and mobilize energies through rhetoric and the power of example. We can think of leadership as a spectrum, in terms of both visibility and the power the leader wields. On one end of the spectrum, we have the most visible, authoritative leaders like the President of the United States, or the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, or a dictator, such as Hitler or Gaddafi. At the opposite end of the spectrum is casual, low-key leadership, found in countless situations every day around the world, leadership that can make a significant difference to the individuals whose lives are touched by it. Over the centuries, the first kind, the out-in-front, authoritative leadership, has generally been exhibited by men. Some men in positions of great authority, including Nelson Mandela, have chosen a strategy of leading from behind. More often, however, top leaders have been quite visible in their exercise of power. Women, as well as some men, have provided casual, low-key leadership behind the scenes. But this pattern has been changing as more women have taken up opportunities for visible, authoritative leadership.
This is Hans Krebs. who in 1937 published a paper showing the sequence of chemical reactions by which energy is released in individual cells. It's called the Krebs cycle, which some of you may remember from your chemistry course in high school. Krebs is a wonderful example to me of how a scientist who is determined can overcome all kinds of human obstacles. Krebs' father constantly discouraged him and told him that he had just mediocre intelligence and would never do anything important in his life as a teenager. What Krebs remembers in his memoir, his father said to him, "You can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear." And later on, when Krebs studied with the great biochemist Otto Warburg, Warburg also told him the same thing, not the same quote, but that he had only mediocre ability and would never be a great scientist. And we all hear about how important it is for parents to encourage their children, but sometimes the children will go on to do great things no matter what we say to them.
Turner, not surprisingly, painted one of the earliest pictures of London's fog in this 1835 painting, the Thames above Waterloo Bridge. Turner, as a true born Londoner, is advertising his familiarity with London's problem by putting smoke and atmospheric pollution at its centre. And as you can see and hear, the bridge is the central element, which is a theme that's later taken up by Monet and is partly obscured by the steam and smoke which rises from both sides of the river. Here we see a shot tower, I think you can just about see it, which was constructed in 1826. Do you know what shakis are? They produce shotguns and munition, and they were very smoky. One of the most smoking industries, but it's barely visible as you can see, as are the various industries on the Lambeth side of the river. There's on this side, there's a steamship about to dock or preparing to leave. It's black smoke thrusting up to join the kind of swirling arc of smoke there. William Rodner sees this painting as a potent essay on the energy and complexity of modern polluted urbanism. Smoke, I think, here represents a flourishing economy which brings employment and food on tables, but also the dirt and pollution associated with it fumes. All seems to be tainted by sulphurous yellow. Even the black plumes of smoke from the two funnels of the steam eye have yellow streaks in them to give them a greater sense of movement and vitality.
But when we move into working with communities, we have to recognize that the communities have to be the authority in their language. Actually, a woman in the class I'm teaching at Sydney at the moment, a career woman, expressed this very nicely. Although she was talking about something else, she was distinguishing expertise from authority, and certainly linguists, because of our training, we do have expertise in certain very narrow areas of language, but we don't have the authority over what to do with that knowledge or what to do with other knowledge that the community produces. I guess for me the bottom line is languages are lost because of the dominance of one people over another. That's not rocket science. It's not hard to work that out. But then what that means is if in working with language revival we continue to hold the authority, we actually haven't done anything towards undoing how languages are lost in the first place. So in a sense the languages are still lost if the authority is still lost.
So when we talk about the paleo regions, just to clarify exactly what we mean, and we have first of all the Arctic at the top of Earth and Antarctic at the bottom. And so the Arctic was named after the Greek word for bear. Surprisingly, it is not after the polar bears that live in the Arctic. It is after the Little and Great Bear constellations that can be seen in the sky. Now the Greeks also hypothesized that there would be an anti-Arctic, which is how we get the name Antarctica. Of course, it wasn't discovered until much later on. Now these regions are opposite in many ways other than just their names and their location on the globe. So if we look at the Arctic first of all, the Arctic is actually ocean surrounded by land. So you can see here, this is the UK down here, and this is Russia, and then America, Canada around here. So there is a bit of land covered in ice on top in the Arctic, which is Greenland here. All these areas here, surprisingly, a lot of people don't realize that this is not actually land. North Pole isn't on land, it is just one big ocean. So if you have to gauge the North Pole, you can stand on it. If you were to drill down through the ice, you would find ocean beneath it.
This is a kind of object that you're probably all familiar with when you had the term robot, but I'm gonna show you the very first robots. These were the very first robots. They were characters in a play in the 1920s called Rossum's Universal Robots, and the play was written by a Czech writer called Karel Čapek. And basically, these robots, people tend to think of robots as kind of cute cuddly toys or, Hollywood depictions kind of devoid of politics. But the first robots were actually created and imagined in a time of absolute political turmoil. You just had the First World War. It finished and had a devastating impact across Europe, and so people are kind of reflecting on what does it mean to be human? What makes us human? Those kinds of questions. And this kind of context is what inspired Čapek to write this play. And interestingly, these robots being human, they are actually in the play assembled on a production line, a bit like the Ford manufacturing production line. So even though they are human, they are assembled, and these robots are designed to labor, and that is their primary purpose in society.
You can see that the two charts each give quite a different picture of the performance of boys and girls in the two key subjects of maths and English. It shows that in English, girls consistently outperform boys over a period of 6 years, achieving scores about 10% above their male peers. There is quite a different picture when we look at the math result with no real difference between genders in the results. What is the explanation for these key differences? To answer this question, researchers look at biological and cognitive factors and a range of social factors. The interaction between these different components in early childhood development are seen as maintained and reinforced in the school context, and this leads to distinct gender patterns of behavior in skills with direct consequences for school performance and achievement. The argument uses this evidence to show that biological factors such as patterns of cognitive development are closely linked to social factors such as learned gender categories. These cognitive skills are learned through preschool and subsequently at school, supported by the responses of teachers, creating a reinforcement of patterns.
This is Hans Krebs, who in 1937 published a paper showing the sequence of chemical reactions by which energy is released in individual cells. It is called the Krebs cycle, which some of you may remember from your chemistry course in your high school. Krebs is a wonderful example to me of how a scientist who is determined can overcome all kinds of human obstacles. Krebs's father constantly discouraged him and told him that he had just mediocre intelligence whenever to anything important in his life as a teenager. What Krebs remembers in his memoir, his father said to him, "You can't make a silk purse that a sews your backslash." And later on, when Krebs studied with the great biochemist Otto Warburg, Warburg also told him the same thing. Not the same quote, but that he had only mediocre ability and would never be a great scientist. And we all hear about how important it is for parents to encourage their children, but sometimes the children will go on to do great things no matter what we say to them.